The UN warns Iraq could be heading back to the darkest days of violence as sectarian attacks spike. Religious leaders call for accountability after killings blamed on militias. But is the government in control? And just how powerful are the armed groups? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Well, over the past year, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant has lost territory, but it's also deepened divisions. The armed group's rise has intensified sectarianism in Iraq. ISIL follows a Sunni ideology, and Shia militias have been the most effective forces fighting the armed group. But that sectarianism has consequences for the civilian population too. At least 7 Sunni mosques were bombed in eastern Iraq earlier this week. Shia militias are being blamed. Well, that followed ISIL's attacks against Shia mosques in the same town. And Shia militias have also been accused of human rights abuses against Sunnis right across the country. We'll get into our discussion in a moment, but first, Al Jazeera's correspondent Mohammed Jamjoon sets up the story from Baghdad.
Concern in Iraq growing over rising sectarian tensions in the town of Muqtadiya in Diyala province. The violence started this past Monday. That's when cafes frequented by Shia militiamen in Muqtadiya were attacked by ISIL. The next day, on Tuesday, began a series of reprisal tit-for-tat sectarian attacks. Mosques, Sunni mosques in the area were firebombed, and shops owned by Sunnis in the area were also attacked. Now, the Iraqi government clearly is reeling from this. They are concerned that they are stretched very thin right now because of the fight on multiple fronts throughout the country against ISIL. They are concerned about the situation in Muqtadiya getting worse. For their part, eyewitnesses, Sunnis in the area, are telling us that they are also concerned that the Shia militias that are operating in that town are doing so without proper oversight from the Iraqi government. Mohammed Jamjoon for Inside Story.
A representative of Iraq's Shia leader, Grand Ayatollah Ali al Sistani, spoke out on Friday condemning the Sunni mosque attacks.
A few days ago, Muqtadiya town in Diyala province witnessed terrorist acts and regrettable attacks on several mosques and houses of civilians, which will definitely have dangerous consequences on peaceful coexistence of people of this country. As we strongly condemn these attacks, we place full responsibility on the government security forces for their repetition.
Well, of the Shia militias accused of carrying out these attacks, some are members of the Popular Mobilisation Forces, or PMF. That's an umbrella organisation of non-state armed groups, some of which have been around for more than a decade. They were brought together by former Prime Minister Nouri Maliki in 2014 after top Shia cleric Ali al Sistani, whom we heard from earlier, issued a call to arms. The Popular Mobilisation Forces reportedly has more than 100,000 well-equipped and well-trained fighters. It receives $1 billion from Iraq's state budget and reportedly also gets funding from Iran. Let's get the thoughts of our guests now. Joining me here in the studio in Doha is Juan, Professor of History at the University of Michigan. And from Beirut, Renard Mansour, Fellow at the Iraq Institute for Strategic Studies. And also from Beirut, Ali al-Dabbagh, former spokesman for the Iraqi government. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Renard in Beirut. You know, once again, we're hearing accusations of militias, Shiite militias, being involved in human rights abuses, in killings in Diyala. How could this happen yet again after all the promises and the reforms that the Iraqi government said it had made to ensure that this kind of thing wouldn't be around for us to discuss today?
Yeah, well, this is just the problematic nature of the Popular Mobilization Units, the Hajj al-Sha'bi. It is an umbrella group that consists of many different groups that don't all listen to the same command and structure. So even though it's meant to be under the fatwa of Sistani, many of them don't necessarily listen to what Sistani has to say on his Friday sermons. There are so many different groups. Some are closer to Iran, some are closer to Sistani. And the problematic nature of the Popular Mobilization Units means that you will have some groups committing offenses, very similar to back in 2006 to 2008 when you had the Jaish al-Mahdi, which was run by Muqtada Sadr, but again, you have fringes and proxies within the group that commit offenses. Now, the bigger problem about the Popular Mobilization Unit is that Haider Abadi has made a decision to make the PMU as part of the state. He went to the UN a few months ago and told them that I consider the Hashd al-Sha'bi as an official part of the Iraqi state. So when you have offenses committed by a so-called organization that's meant to be part of the Iraqi state, that further exasperates the sectarian tensions and the crisis of trust that some Iraqis have with the government today.
Ali, back in April 2015, Human Rights Watch was one of the human rights organizations that accused the Prime Minister of Iraq of backtracking on earlier commitments and statements about holding militia leaders accountable. What has changed since then? How many militiamen have been arrested after the Diyala killings? How many militia heads are under investigation?
Yeah, the problem that the government, they don't have a real power over such militias, and everybody knows in Iraq that this is the future threat in Iraq. Will be this armored group which is out of the power of the Prime Minister of the government.
Surely
this is
they
the
have
problem.
The power to arrest and investigate,
they are not representing
don't they?
the full al-Hashd al-Sha'bi. But I don't think that they have that much power. Even the Prime Minister doesn't have that much power to confront those militias, which definitely it is a big threat for his power, for his cabinet, for the government of Iraq, as well as for the future. But what I want to say, that what happened in Muqtadiya, it has been condemned, as the report shows, that condemned by Grand Ayatollah, and is well received by the Speaker of the House, Mr. Salim al-Juburi. I think that Muqtadiya and Diyala itself shows during the past 10 years a lot of horrific attack on both sides. Those devil attack and devil act which work both together, igniting the Shia and the Sunni feeling, it's definitely it's not going to be spreaded after what Sunnis had faced from a devil enemy, which is ISIL, which again I think they know very well that there is a common enemy. Well, for the Shia and for the Sunnis, both of them they are facing. They have to come together. But even though such attack in Muqtadiya is a real threat and alarm to the Iraqi government that this is a sectarian being done by enemies of Iraq, whether they are ISIL or even some armored group belong to the Shia even.
All right, the enemies of Iraq, Juan, they're doing attacks, but on one side, of course, you have a group like ISIL, which is nowhere near internationally recognized as a sort of legitimate authority. On the other side, though, you have Popular Mobilisation Forces, which are affiliated with the state, which is internationally recognized and is expected to uphold international standards. It's very worrying when you hear, as we're hearing in this show, analysts say, yeah, we're not even sure that these militias are under state control.
Well, they're not under state control. Very clearly, they rioted in Muqtadiya, and they injured ordinary civilians. They acted like a tribal group having a feud rather than like a military force.
So what happened to the Prime Minister's directive in April 2015 when he ordered that the Popular Mobilisation Forces be put under direct control of his office? Has he basically failed? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think he did fail in that attempt, and it's inevitable that he would. The problem is that the Iraqi army collapsed. And when you don't have a strong army reporting to the central government, and you're thrown into reliance on what are essentially militias, and those militias come from political groupings, from city quarters, from tribes, they have their own agendas, then it weakens the Prime Minister, weakens the government. And the worst case scenario is that if the government becomes too dependent on these groups, you could end up with Libya, because that's exactly what happened in Libya, is that the government had no army. It depended on those militias that had been formed during the revolution, and they declined to disarm, and then eventually they took over the country and fought with each other.
That's a very worrying thought there. I want to come back to Ali. As someone who's worked within the Iraqi government as well as outside it, it was interesting to hear you say that you're not sure that the Prime Minister or the government really is in control of these forces. Who then is in control of Iraq?
Well, I agree with your guest in Doha that in the presence of a real powerful military forces from Iraq, definitely such militias. But let me separate and isolate those who are militias which they don't follow the instruction of the Ibadi, and the majority of al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, which is definitely they came as the edict of the fatwa of Ali al Sistani. They are complying with the government and with the Prime Minister and with whatever coming from, and definitely those is easily could be disarmed after the finish of the war. I don't know when, but definitely the real threat and the problem is those militias which belong to some of the parties like al-Asaib, al-Kataib, and those Badr, those all of them, they are loyal to Iran. This is not a secret. Everybody knows that Iran is having
Ali,
more control
some of those
over
groups
their
which you've
decision
mentioned
compared
there,
with what Haider al-Abadi.
some of those groups that you mentioned there, like al-Badr, the ministers of this current cabinet, some of the ministers hail from that organization, which, you know, drives me back to the question, who is in control of Iraq? I mean, we were looking at it a minute ago from the perspective of, is the government in control of the militias? Maybe the real question is, are the militias in control of the government, or at least some of them?
Well, it depends on the regions. You see, in Diyala, the government lost the power in Diyala since many years. At the time of Maliki, even the real power on the ground was militias, and it was a continuous crisis and conflict among them. In Al-Anbar is the same. But in other governments, definitely the government and the Iraqi military forces, whether it's a police or military, they have the control. But in such a places, in a critical places like Diyala, definitely they have a problem. And I am not sure that the government could gain that power unless they have a formula. They reach to a formula with those armored group and militias, which is out of the control of Haider al-Abadi. I don't think it is an easy job. It's a big threat for Haider al-Abadi to find a formula to let those militias comply with the rule of law. This is the problem, and again, it is a bigger threat for the Haider al-Abadi.
Okay, Ranad, as we're hearing there from Ali, the way he put it was that most of these militias, which are part of the Popular Mobilisation Forces, are under the control, or at least listen to, the Prime Minister, but some clearly are not. We've seen that in Diyala. Who do they report to then?
Well, there are several actors who are still influential. Of course, Abadi's predecessor, Nouri al-Maliki, is still quite influential with some of the groups. So are, as you've mentioned, the Badr Corps. Hadi al-Amiri, for example, is very influential. He was destined to be actually the Minister of Interior, but at the last minute lost the job, but nonetheless is probably one of the most powerful actors on the ground in terms of military strength. Also, you have Iranians. I mean, you see Qasem Soleimani, for example. I think a lot of decisions are being made with him, his consultations, definitely. So there are several actors that are working for their own ends and don't necessarily want to see Prime Minister Abadi succeed in some areas. So there is an internal Shia struggle going on that's being played out in many of these areas, and you do have a camp that want to progress, want to move forward, want to regain the trust of Iraqi Sunnis, but then you have another camp that just similarly, just want sectarianism and need some sort of sectarian conflict to gain legitimacy on the ground, and this is the problematic nature of the country at the moment.
I'm glad you've come to that. As a follow-up, Renard, how much of a threat are some of these militias to the Prime Minister himself, when some of them, as you said, like Asaib al-Haqq, are seen close to the former Prime Minister? Some of them, like Kataib Hezbollah, are committed to an Iranian model of government. you know, how much commitment do they have to seeing this prime minister succeed even?
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest problems. I mean, every now and then you even hear rumors that Abadi's life might be at threat, but nonetheless, those are just rumors. It is difficult for Abadi. It's difficult to see Abadi succeeding with these militias, with the power they have. Now, he's trying to do something. What he's trying to do is to regain, you know, what you would call the power of the purse. You had Al-Muhandis, another major leader in the umbrella, the Popular Mobilization Units, send Abadi a letter a few months ago, essentially saying, we need money, why aren't you sending us money? So Abadi is responsible for sending money and weapons to the militias, and perhaps he can, through this, use some advantage, take some advantage from it. But nonetheless, these are a powerful group of actors that are bent on ensuing their interest and pursuing their interest, rather, without really taking what Abadi might want or what might be best for Iraq.
Well, as we've been saying, the Shia-Sunni divide in Iraq has become increasingly pronounced over the past decade. Let's take a look at what Baghdad looked like back in 2003. Now, the red shows the Sunni communities, the yellow regions occupied mainly by Shias, and all the orange represents the mixed population where no one group held a majority. Strip forward to 2008 and that integrated community space almost gone. Sunnis and Shias have almost completely segregated. Sad picture, coming to a point, if there is a way to reverse that sort of pattern, Juan, coming to a point which Renard mentioned, the power of the purse. Now, we know that it's around $1 billion was set aside for funding the Popular Mobilisation Forces, but they get money from other sources too, don't they? Iranian government. Take us through some of the other sources of funding.
Well, the Shiite militias in Iraq have a number of funding sources. As you say, Badr Corps probably still gets some salary from Iran. Others of them engage in various forms of smuggling, antiquity smuggling, oil smuggling, or, you know, gasoline trucks are not so hard to hijack. Not now, but a few years ago, in the midst of the American occupation, it was estimated at one point that the Shiite militias were siphoning off as much as $5 billion a year from the gasoline of the country.
There's got to be a real challenge to the idea of a unified state when some of them are even getting money directly from foreign governments.
Sure. Well, Iraq is not a unified state. I mean, at the moment, it's lying in three major pieces, and then there are internal divisions within those pieces. So it's more like almost a feudal situation in which there are overlapping sovereignties and patches of land belonging to this baron or that baron.
So when we hear, you know, sort of the perspective, like Ali was explaining, that you often hear from current Iraqi officials talk about a unified Iraq. They talk about that there is a common enemy. Extremism from all sides is an enemy to all Iraqis. One wonders how much of the population, particularly the Sunni population, will buy into that when they see some militias supported by foreign powers, some militias taking over or siphoning off, as you said, state resources. And if they feel that the state is unable to protect them, does that push them further into the arms of even, you know, extreme groups like ISIL and so on?
Well, sure it does. This is the great danger of what happened in Muqtadiya and why Grand Ayatollah Sistani spoke out, is that the message from the Abadi government to the Sunnis in Diyala was, we can protect you from ISIL. And ISIL is evil. It will, you know, do damage to your populations if you let them in. And if, in fact, what Abadi has brought is these Shiite militias who act in a lawless way and are seen, you know, to be blowing up Sunni mosques, damaging Sunni interests, then it really pitches the question: well, is ISIL really worse? And that's the last thing you want from the Iraqi
people to start thinking about that,
yeah.
right? Renard, have foreign powers unofficially, shall we say, adopted a policy of simply accepting the reality of militias, if not their legitimacy as actors in Iraq? When you look at the policy that's been going on of sending weapons to Iraq that end up in the hands of militia members who then post it on Facebook showing themselves standing on M1A1 Abrams tanks, the US backing to Kurdish fighters in the Battle of Kobani and so on and so forth. It almost seems like the world's kind of accepted that in Iraq and Syria, it's legitimate to deal and accept the legitimacy of non-state actors.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think what we have is we're moving beyond, I suppose, what was once a taboo of militias. I mean, just consider the Kurdish Peshmerga of Iraq. Not only are they sanctioned or mandated to defend their areas, but they were also mandated to move into Syria and Kobani last year to essentially go into another country. So we are beginning to move away from the state-centric view of militaries. In terms of the Hashd al-Sha'bi or the Popular Mobilization Units, I think it's also important to look at why they are popular. I went around asking, some of the recruits and some of the administrative officers, why is it that you're joining the militias or the paramilitary groups rather than joining the army, rather than joining the Ministry of Defense? And overwhelmingly, the response was, we want to work for a functioning organization rather than dysfunctional organization. After what happened in Mosul in June 2014 and what's happened to the Iraqi army since, they just don't have faith that it's worth it to fight for that. So
right.
Even though their incentives might be the same to defend Iraq against ISIL, they are choosing other forms that they view as more legitimate as one and also more effective second.
Ali, are you of the opinion that perhaps a different approach by international powers towards dealing with armed groups in Iraq would be something that would be helpful if perhaps the US said, hey, no more weapons until we see less of it ending up in the hands of the likes of Kataib Hezbollah?
See, whatever we say against those militias, which is not following the Abadi instructions or rule, but again, those groups, they defend, they took the land in Salah ad-Din and they protect Baghdad in the absence of a real powerful military forces, Iraqi forces, which they cannot defend the country from the expansion of ISIS and Daesh. And this is very important. Whatever negative experience Iraqis or the Sunnis they have, but now the Sunnis feel that those Shia, which whatever past history during the past 10 years, the conflict and the sectarian feeling and charges, but those Shia, they come and they defend their land and they liberate Salah ad-Din and they are protecting now the backside of the military forces in Al-Anbar. They are not in the front battle, but they are on the back supporting. This feeling is not it is not as so black as it has been presented. The relation, the Sunni-Shia relation after the occupation of ISIS to Al-Anbar and Salah ad-Din, I think it's totally going to be changed. Now, those militias, the only powerful ground forces which they could hold the ground in Salah ad-Din. And this is the fact. Now Iraqi government, they don't have an option because only to depend on those militias irrespective of all the acts which they have and all the agendas and side agendas which they have, but at the end they are forces. Right, it is a future threat, Iraqi government and the whole Iraq. Not only the Sunnis, the Shia themselves, they are going to face, because those people, they are going.
Hang on, Ali,
they will
when
be.
you
They
say,
will, they
when
will
you
go
say
back
it's not
to the
so black
Shia
as
cities.
being presented, I mean, Amnesty International talks about Shia militias supported and armed by the government of Iraq, abducting and killing scores of Sunni civilians with total impunity. I mean, that was from a June 2015 statement. When that sort of picture is going on, when you talk about these militias, whatever negativity they've done, they're still protecting and liberating areas. Will that be seen by all communities in Iraq, especially the Sunnis, are on the receiving end of abductions and torture?
I do agree. I mean, this has been condemned by the highest cleric, which is the Grand Ayatollah Sistani, by the politicians. But again, I am telling that the majority of the Iraqis, the Sunni and Shia, after the ISIL crisis in Iraq, they feel that not as bad as before. I do agree that still there is a problem,
right,
due to the confrontation of Maliki, crisis of Maliki in Al-Anbar, in Hawija, and Mosul, in all the places which unnecessarily he confront the Sunnis and deepen the sectarian feeling among the Sunni and the Shia.
Right.
But now those Shia groups, whether they are militias or Hashd al-Sha'bi, they came front and then they liberate their land. They lost thousands of people to liberate the Sunni land. It is a positive point, give that feeling.
Okay,
we
we'll
didn't
have to
condemn
leave
all
it there,
what
I'm
happened
afraid.
from militias against the Sunni, the same
We
thing.
are out of time. Let's thank our guests, Juan Cole here in the studio, Renad Mansour and Ali al-Dabbagh. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programme page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and all the team, for now is goodbye.